Before this video begins, I just want to give a big shout out to my top tier Patreon supporters, William the Weeb and Taoist Soulweaver. You guys are legends. If you want to go above and beyond in supporting this channel, then feel free to check out my Patreon. The link is in the description as always. Anyways, let's get started. Rouge, the double-crossing spy thief that's out for some jewels. This has been a character that so many people have requested that I analyze, and with good reason. While I did briefly talk about Rouge in my shadow character analysis, I figured it was finally time for her to get her own video. Plus, with the releases of both Dark Beginnings and Sonic X Shadow Generations, over 5 months ago, what better time is there to talk about her? I personally enjoy Rouge, and she's been a fan favorite character with good reason. But her writing had seen a noticeable shift since her inception, mainly in the 2010s. I know, it was a shock to me too. But, as always, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Let's start from the beginning and see what made her so great, how she was ruined, and if her character managed to be saved by these two gems. We're first introduced to fuck, I did it again. We're first introduced to Rouge in Sonic Adventure 2, where she's in the middle of a confrontation with Knuckles about the Master Emerald. We learn here that she's seemingly a jewel thief, or treasure hunter, as denoted by the line,
"All the world's gems are mine to keep."
Immediately, this sets up a very superficial look for the character. I mean, the stereotypically attractive character of the franchise lusting after jewelry doesn't really create a whole lot of expectation. Luckily, this is just the surface level depiction for the character, and there's a lot more to her than meets the eye. This scene also kickstarts the iconic rivalry between Knuckles and Rouge as they spend most of the game in a race to collect the pieces of the Master Emerald. And I'll circle back to this whole rivalry bit a few more times in the video. And before we keep going with the story, I just want to quickly bring some attention to her design here because I really like it. No, not like that. Genuinely though, I don't know that I've discussed this a lot, but Yuji Uekawa's artwork is, in my opinion, the definitive look for this cast, mainly his stuff from the adventure games. I think it just captures these characters so well. I feel like just showing this image of Rouge could tell you a lot about her character and personality without really needing to tell you anything about her. It really does give off that femme fatale vibe, especially thanks to the artwork involving a lot of rounded lines and curves, compared to say the straight edges of Shadow's design. And it showcases what a strong art style can do for a character. Hell, I reckon showing you any of these images on their own could give you an idea about the character and their personalities. Anyways, getting back to the story, we see Rouge talking to this mysterious voice over the radio whilst infiltrating Robotnik's base. And she learns that he's utilizing the Space Colony Ark for something most definitely nefarious, and also mentions something about her mission. And this is where Rouge's character starts to get a little more interesting. For you see, it's revealed to us that she's actually a gun agent and was sent to gather information about Robotnik. And I genuinely like that they showed this not just through her dialogue, but also through her actions. Like, for example, highlighting her infiltration skills with how she's able to drop in on Robotnik and Shadow without being noticed, quickly becoming a member of their team by bribing them with a Chaos Emerald and gaining their trust. This is something that I'll bring up several times, but Rouge definitely has a way with words. Not only this, but we see that Rouge is an expert in espionage and gathering information. Everything from her locating several emeralds for Robotnik, including tracking down Tails and learning about Shadow and his past, while still gathering info about Robotnik and reporting it back to Gun, and going after the Master Emerald shards whilst being a double agent in the process. Hell, at one point she just straight up tricks Robotnik into giving her the password for the Ark computer, giving her access to classified information about Project Shadow to aid her investigation. Rouge is intelligent, cunning, and has a way of manipulating the situation to her best advantage. Beyond this, it's her interactions with the other characters that really elevates her own. Going back to the rivalry with Knuckles, we see through the game that there's an almost genuine disdain that the two have for each other in their race to collect the shards of the Emerald. They're essentially in a heated competition that eventually reaches a point where the pair end up fighting in space. After their confrontation, Rouge trips and begins to fall into a pit of lava, but ends up getting saved by Knuckles. Even though she could probably just fly away. I mean, come on, you're a bat, woman, think. This is where she starts to see Knuckles in a bit of a different light. Yeah, there's definitely some of that romantic tension here, and this causes Rouge to give up the Master Emerald shards, even if she lied about why she gave it back. saying that they stink just like echidnas do. And further proof of this tension is the little smile she cracks looking back at Knuckles. I like that this scene shows that there is goodness in Rouge, and it's understandable why she's been acting the way she has all game. You know, being more reclusive and aloof, not really allowing anybody to see her true personality. I mean, she is a secret agent. Trusting in anybody's gotta be risky, especially in this line of work. Which is why she does act selfishly, which actually ends up being a very in-character reason as to why her goal is just to collect jewels. It's so self-centered, but it works. But this is one of the few times where she doesn't act like this, and instead lets a bit of her real personality slip through. But even more than the playful rivalry with Knuckles, it's her interactions with Shadow that absolutely made her character for me. These two have arguably one of the most genuine friendships in the series. In the earlier parts of the game, these two were actually quite distant, and Rouge didn't really bat an eye at him.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
But things took a turn when they went to Prison Island, with Rouge being tasked to steal the Chaos Emeralds from a gun vault, where she ends up getting into a fight with a gun soldier, and then gets locked in as a bomb is about to go off. Wait, if Rouge works for gun, then why do we have to break in and steal the emerald in the first place? Couldn't they have just given it to her and not locked her in so that she doesn't die? And why didn't she warn anyone in gun of the bomb that's about to go off so that the soldiers could evacuate and not get blown up? The only explanation I can come up with for this is that only the higher-ups at Gun knew of Rouge and her mission, and they just needed to keep it a secret, whilst the normal staff sort of just saw her as an intruder. But hey, that's just a theory. A game oh wait, yeah, no, that hits a little different now. Anyways, when Shadow saves her life, she starts to see him in a bit of a different light. Not as this beacon of destruction, but an oddity. For someone who was trying to destroy the entire planet and didn't seem to care about her or anyone in the slightest, it was strange that he would go out of his way to save her. Shadow tries to cover it up, saying that he did it just for the emeralds, but Rouge figured that there's a lot more to Shadow than meets the eye. This, again, shows her insight and knack for obtaining information. Just through Shadow's body language and dialogue, she was able to tell that there's a bigger story here. Something beyond this evil ultimate life form that she'd been researching on behalf of Gun. And further reinforcing this notion is when she confronts Shadow about his origin, asking if he's even the real Shadow. And Shadow adamantly states that, even if his memories aren't real, that it's still him and he will fulfill his promise to Maria. And what's pretty interesting here is that Rouge's voice becomes more and more somber as the conversation progresses, as she goes from trying to interrogate him to being almost worried about Shadow. Much like she did with Knuckles, she seems to be starting to care for the broody Hedgehog. And then all of these thoughts about Shadow are finally confirmed to her during the finale of the game when Shadow sacrifices himself to save Earth. Rouge in this whole game hasn't really let her femme fatale walls down, except for that one moment with Knuckles. And even then, she did try to cover it up. Yet, here, she's genuinely sad about Shadow's passing and doesn't really try to hide her feelings. It took his death for her to realize what his true character is. Who Shadow really was. I mean, when Sonic walked back into the Ark, she was the first person to speak, and immediately she asked where Shadow was. She was genuinely concerned about him, and you can see that with how sad and soft-spoken she becomes after learning of Shadow's death, which contrasts her usual playful and sassy tone. And when she asks if he really was this ultimate life form designed to kill, Sonic simply remarks that he was a brave and heroic hedgehog, to which she immediately agrees. She knows that Shadow was more than a revenge-driven killer. Watching him give his life to fulfill his promise to a long-dead best friend proved that to her. And this leads to her wanting to change herself. She even states to Knuckles that she's thinking about moving on from the life of a treasure hunter.
So that was a fucking lie.
Yeah, that's one thing that was completely thrown out of the window in all future appearances of the character, but honestly, I don't mind. It's a fairly minor detail to the character, and I think her being a treasure hunter works more with her character. She also states that there's something more than jewels that she's thinking about right now, clearly referring to Knuckles and setting up that playful romantic rivalry for the future. But that was Rouge in Sonic Adventure 2, and yeah, what a great introduction for the character. She starts off as the cunning, double-crossing jewel thief who operates purely in her own self-interest. But over time, we see her beginning to lower her walls and even show genuine care for others, something that her life as a spy likely never allowed her to do. Sonic Team could have easily made her a one-dimensional generic femme fatale character, but instead they chose to give her some real depth and complexity. I mean, it's not like they'd ever reduce her character to a bland stereotype or anything like that, right?
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
Up next, we have Sonic Heroes, where Rouge is first seen breaking into a Robotnik base with ease, again emphasizing her skills. She comes across a capsule of the supposedly dead Shadow that is now miraculously alive, but at the same time as she frees him, E123 Omega activates and starts duking it out with Shadow. Rouge is able to deduce through Omega's dialogue that he believes Shadow is an Eggman robot, and so decides to intervene, putting an end to the fight and, once again, displaying her intelligence and awareness. She then sits the two down for a quick classroom circle time, and I like that she immediately notices that Shadow has amnesia and takes advantage of both that and Omega's sheer hatred of Robotnik to form Team Dark. It once again highlights her manipulative capabilities. She still uses her words to control a situation and immediately becomes the glue holding this group together. And yeah, if she didn't speak up and cool the tension, Omega would probably be dead by now. And I know some may find it weird that Rouge is the one forming a team, given how she was more of a solo worker in Sonic Adventure 2 that really didn't trust anyone, but remember, she did go through a character arc, and part of that arc did involve learning to trust and care for people, especially with the incident involving Shadow. So this is actually kind of consistent with her character. And speaking of which, I love Team Dark. I don't know that I've made this clear enough with many of my previous videos, but I love everything about this trio. Their interactions with each other, their dynamic, their teamwork. They feel like a band of misfits, as though this team really shouldn't work, but they do. They are, in my opinion, the best team in the franchise. Man, I really should make a Team Dark video at some point. Rouge essentially acts as the voice of Team Dark, whilst the other two are more of the fighters of the group. The muscle, if you will. And whilst Rouge does start this story by seemingly only caring about treasure, she does, much like Shadow, enjoy spending time with these guys and does genuinely care for them. One example of this care is in the cutscene after the Egg Albatross boss fight. They find a wrecked Shadow android on the ground, and as Shadow stares at it, seemingly lost as he possibly grapples with the idea that he too may be a fake, Rouge just looks concerned for him and tries to talk to and potentially comfort him. But Shadow does just kind of move on. And I know some people are gonna ask, well, why didn't Rouge tell Shadow about his past? And I don't exactly have a definitive answer to that, but my headcanon is that she wanted to learn more about the situation before revealing anything. You know, she is a government spy and is an expert in obtaining information. I mean, what are the chances that Shadow survived, right? It would be something she would potentially look into before revealing any information. Or perhaps she was simply afraid about what the truth could do to Shadow's mental state and doesn't want to, you know, have him try to destroy the whole planet again? Or it's just that the devs needed an excuse for the Shadow the Hedgehog game to exist. I mean, you can decide for yourself. But another example of her caring nature can be seen after they defeat the Egg Emperor. She comes across a room filled with clones of Shadow and is understandably shocked. And then when Omega enters to destroy the place, she starts to talk about how the Shadow that was with them was likely a robot, but cuts herself off and leaves. Her melancholy over the possibility that this might be true, that the real Shadow may be forever lost, is proof of how deeply she cares for him. And it's cool to see that she's had this suspicion about Shadow being a fake for a while now, further reinforcing my theory that she never told Shadow about his past in order to gather more information as to whether this Shadow was the real one. But then Omega does state that if she knows about cloning, then it must mean the original exists somewhere, hinting that perhaps the Shadow that they've been traveling with is the real one, or at least the real Shadow is still out there somewhere. Which suddenly uplifts Rouge's mood, and then she goes right back to hanging out with Shadow and makes plans to steal the Master Emerald. And speaking of which, I also like that the rivalry between her and Knuckles is still confirmed in this final cutscene. She strolls by him, teasing that she's going after someone else's treasure, and Knuckles kinda laughs it off before chasing right after her. It's still as playful as ever, with that underlying flirtatious tension. Following Heroes, we have the Shadow the Hedgehog game, where Rouge is still working alongside Shadow to help quell the threat of the Black Arms. There isn't really much to say about her character here, as it isn't much of a feature, but it's still consistent with her character thus far. She still supports Shadow through whatever decisions he makes, though I do wish she had a bit of a bigger role to play here. You know, given that this game is called Shadow the Hedgehog and Rouge is one of his closest friends. Who knows, maybe one day we'll get that Team Dark game. A man can only dream. Now though, let's talk about what may arguably be Rouge's best appearance, that being in Sonic 06. From the very start, she is working alongside Shadow as a member of Gun, and their teamwork is still on point. I mean, why else would Rouge specifically ask Shadow to escort her to the rendezvous point in Kingdom Valley if she didn't trust him? And I like that Shadow doesn't even question why she wants to go there or why she wants him to help her in particular. He simply asks her where the rendezvous point is, and that's that. That level of trust between them speaks volumes about their friendship, and there are plenty of moments emphasizing that bond. And throughout the game, we get to see that Rouge's character has remained consistent with her previous appearances, for example, showcasing her intelligence and resourcefulness. I mean, she's the one who figures out that her and Shadow had been teleported to the future, and therefore deduces that Mephiles can manipulate time. And let's not forget about her infiltration skills, as she was the one to break into Robotnik's base in the White Acropolis to steal the Scepter of Darkness. But it's not only her skills and position that have remained consistent, but her love of jewels hasn't faded either. I mean, she's the first to try and grab the Chaos Emeralds before the Iblis boss fight, and there's even a cutscene where, yeah, she's pretty much outwardly professing her love to an emerald.
My precious Chaos Emerald, you are also beautiful.
But what makes this cutscene even better is that she immediately shifts her focus when she and Shadow discover a dysfunctional Omega. She genuinely seems saddened when she realizes that they have to leave him behind, showing that while she still treasures her jewels, her priorities have evolved. Her friends now come first, which is a complete 180 from how she would treat people back in her Adventure 2 days. And this growth in her character is seen later in the game after Shadow stays behind in the future to fight Mephiles alone with no Chaos Emerald to get back to the present timeline. Rouge immediately puts her duty as a gun agent on hold, telling her commander that she has something more important to do, which is to help Shadow. She then contacts Omega and devises a plan to give him a Chaos Emerald so that he can deliver it to Shadow in the future and assist him in a fight against Mephiles. And the fact that Omega is the first person that she turns to speaks volumes about her trust in him, and it won't be the last time that she does something like this. Not to mention what the scenario shows about her adaptability with how she came up with this plan so quickly. But then, we have Rouge's greatest moment in the game. Now, I've spoken about this part in my Shadow character analysis, but just to recap, Mephiles, in an earlier encounter, told Shadow that humanity would come to fear his power and ultimately turn on him and seal him away. Then, later on in the story, Mephiles confronts Omega and drops the bombshell that the one who actually defeats Shadow in the future is Omega. And then Omega, in a pretty human moment for the robot, decides to tell Shadow that it would be him that defeats and seals him in the future on behalf of humanity. And in a brilliant showcase of how close these two are as friends, Shadow is genuinely hurt by this and just walks away, not knowing what to think or do. And then, in a brilliant moment that defines Rouge's character, she steps in to say this.
Shadow? Even if you believe everyone in the world will be against you, know that I'll always remain by your side. Remember that.
This moment perfectly encapsulates Rouge's growth and is what makes her such a compelling character. Yes, she can be selfish. Yes, she can be sassy or even rude, and yes, she can even be manipulative at times, using people to get what she wants, seeing them as nothing more than a means to an end. But ultimately, when it comes to the people she really cares about, she will always stand by them, even if the rest of the world doesn't. Because deep down, she is a good person and has learned to care more for people. And it's thanks to her that Shadow regains his resolve, allowing him, Rouge, and Omega to stand together against Mephiles. Everything about Rouge's portrayal in Sonic 06 feels like a natural continuation of her established character. The only aspect that didn't really sit right with me was her relationship with Knuckles. Whilst Rouge still acted playfully towards him, Knuckles seemed to harbour nothing but resentment for her, which felt inconsistent with how their dynamic had been portrayed in previous games. However, this issue felt more like a problem with Knuckles and his writing rather than Rouge's. Unfortunately though, it'd be a while before we get to see Rouge having any kind of major appearances, because for the rest of the 2000s, she rarely shows up in many games besides some spin-offs. And then, of course, we have the 2010s.
I don't like where this is going.
Rouge's appearances in the 2010s feel similar to Blaze in that they're pretty rare, especially with the mainline entries. But unlike Blaze, her appearances were accompanied by much poorer writing. Her character gets completely flanderized into the generic, stereotypically attractive chick with a love of jewels, which she is, but the 2010s make sure that that's all she is. There's no depth here, no real personality, no major roles, nothing. She appears in Sonic Colors, but only the DS version, and doesn't do much of anything except flirt with Sonic. Hang on, wait a minute. Flirts with Sonic? Why wouldn't it be Knuckles? In Sonic Generations, like everyone else, she's just there and again doesn't do much of anything. And the rewrite for the remaster barely changes anything as well, so there isn't much to speak on there. And don't worry, I'll discuss Shadow Generations in just a bit. Then came Sonic Forces, which did give me some kind of hope thanks to the episode Shadow DLC. For years at this point, Sega just kind of forgot about Team Dark and downplayed them as ever being friends. I guess to fit in with the horrendous characterization of Shadow at the time. But this DLC finally has these three acting as some sort of team again, and wow, Rouge's character is just so hollow. It's like sticking a stranger in a Rouge cosplay and telling her to act the part. I mean, just listen to some of these lines.
Do it to it, Shadow. And there's a rumor going around that old rotten Eggman has been developing some kind of new weapon. Omega said the same thing. You two go together like chili and hot dogs.
Nothing about this feels like Rouge. Even in Team Sonic Racing, it's just another flaccid, one-note depiction of the character that barely does anything. But nothing, and I repeat, nothing, comes close to how awful her character was in Sonic Freeriders. In this game, she is nothing but a spiteful, self-centered bitch, to the point where she's literally willing to sacrifice a teammate because all she wants is money. Oh yeah, you see, earlier in the game, Rouge and Shadow want to join the tournament for the cash prize, but you need to have 3 members in order to enter. I guess Omega was just sleeping that day. They then bring in this egg pawn named E10000B into the team as their substitute who races with them for free, although we do learn about his true intentions later. But as the game proceeds, he starts to break down to the point where smoke emerges from his body, and just listen to how Rouge responds to this.
Hey, you alright? Hold it together.
His timing's just great. That cash prize is just one more race away.
Please let poor Mr. Robot rest.
I can relate to wanting that money, believe me. But it's not worth sacrificing a teammate.
I don't see why you're getting all worked up here. He's a machine, so he spews a little smoke.
The audacity!
He's just a machine? I'm sorry, then what the fuck is Omega? Would Rouge really be this nonchalant if it was him? I get that she's not particularly close to this robot, but holy fuck, this is just downright evil. Even Adventure 2 Rouge would have never been this cold, and this is Rouge post her character arc. Yes, E10000B is revealed to be Metal Sonic in disguise, but Rouge didn't know that. So even that isn't a good reason for the way her character acted. The writers here literally took her selfishness and made that her only character trait, which we know not to be true. God, Freeriders really does suck, huh? And accompanying her in the 2010s was a change in the voice actor to Karen Strassman. Now, to be clear, her ability isn't the problem. We've seen with Dark Beginnings that she can play a good Rouge, so it's more so the fault of the direction. But seriously, these depictions make it sound like Rouge should be standing on a street corner, and the writing doesn't really help with that.
Since you're a king and everything, do you have a crown covered with jewels and a treasure vault filled with precious gems?
In my opinion, Lani Minello is probably the best Rouge voice actor, but honestly, that might be the nostalgia talking. I also do quite like Kathleen Delaney's work. It feels a bit more like a mature take on the character. But yeah, I do think Radical Soda put it best when he said that Rouge's voice during the 2010s sounds as though she's permanently stuck on the seduce setting. The older titles made it a point to show that her being this attractive, jewel-loving stereotype was simply the surface that covered the more real and potent traits of the character, such as her caring nature when it comes to her friends. But in the 2010s, her character had been regressed into a one-note selfish temptress and nothing more than that. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, and you could have a character designed to be just that. You know, playing into a stereotype doesn't have to be a negative. But Rouge already had an established character that the writers just seemed to completely forget about. And the games weren't the only casualties. External media like Sonic Prime also did her a disservice. Her character felt very generic and plain. Granted, her role was very minimal, but even then, why was she hanging out with Sonic and the gang instead of, oh, I don't know, Shadow? Especially since Sonic Prime has been confirmed to be canon by Ian Flynn himself. So I struggle to buy that Rouge wouldn't be hanging out with Shadow. So, does all this mean that Rouge's character is forever ruined? Is everything that was once great about her gone? Well, no. And it's thanks to these two beauties. Dark Beginnings had her showing up at the base Shadow was attacking, and she was sent by Gunn to gather information, which we eventually learned was about the Time Eater. So immediately, we know that she's working with Gunn, and we get to see her traits as a spy on display again. Finally, some fucking character consistency. And her character even bleeds into her combat, which is nimbler and more acrobatic compared to the others, which is actually consistent with how she fought in Adventure 2. I mean, her hits are even accompanied by squeaky toy sound effects, emphasizing her lighter, less powerful strikes compared to Shadow or Omega. But her physical strength isn't what matters, it's her unique abilities, her deception, infiltration, adaptability, and a host of other skills that make her invaluable and help to even the odds. Plus, she's got Shadow and Omega as her muscle, and who really needs more than that? And on that topic, I love that when she was considering backup for that mission, her first thought was Omega, which speaks to their friendship. Finally, she's working with her friends again, and it doesn't feel so forced. The ending of this short as well has Rouge being scolded for not talking Shadow down from raiding the gun base. But Rouge remarks by saying that there was only one person that could ever get through to him, clearly referring to Maria. And this just goes to show how much she truly knows about Shadow. She knows how important Maria is to him, as she is ultimately a kind person. But I do think that Rouge is doing herself a disservice here by saying this, as there have been several times where she's been able to get through to Shadow. Like I said earlier, she has a way with words. I mean, just look at the beach scene from Sonic 06 as a prime example of this. I think Rouge is underestimating just how much of an effect she has on Shadow. But that's not the end of the story, because we still gotta talk about Shadow Generations. Whilst she once again has very limited appearances, the way that she acts with Shadow continues to feel far more real and genuine compared to the 2010s. I mean, she's the only one contacting and talking to him, she jokes around with him, and then there's the in-game dialogue. Whilst some of it is more or less filler, there are some good lines here that I do want to point out as they really highlight her friendship with Shadow and her good nature. Like this one where she playfully teases Shadow for caring about her, not too dissimilar to how she acted with Knuckles. She even states that she doesn't trust many people and respects fewer, but then goes on to say that Shadow is special to her and that if he needs anyone after all this is done, that she's there for him. This, in combination with her calling Shadow a big softie, once again shows how close they are and emphasizes Rouge's compassionate side. She knows the real Shadow beneath that brooding, introverted exterior. Hell, even in the final cutscene, after Shadow loses Maria and Gerald, Shadow runs past Rouge and then a tear of his hits her in the face. And Rouge just smiles. She doesn't need to say anything here, cause she knows this is who Shadow really is. Ultimately, Rouge's character has kind of been all over the place. She initially was the aloof, self-serving femme fatale that's always acted in her best interests, even if she had to deceive people to get what she wants. Hell, she probably had never made any meaningful connections in her life because of this. But through her interactions with characters like Knuckles, Omega, and Shadow, she learned to let those walls down and show her true caring nature, to where she would be willing to give up her precious treasures for them. However, that writing was thrown out of the window in favor of a far more one-dimensional take on the character, a take that I, and many others, really dislike. But Rouge's appearances in Shadow Generations and Dark Beginnings, though minor, do seem to signal a return to form for the Bat. Hopefully it continues to move in that direction, but as always, only time will tell. Well, thank you all for watching. If you did enjoy this video, then feel free to leave a like, subscribe, and turn notifications on to keep up with all future content. If you want to go above and beyond in supporting the channel, then why not check out my Patreon? The link is in the description as always. And speaking of which, I want to give a massive thank you to all my patrons. You guys are legends. But with all that said, I'll see you guys next time.